Now, the Nigerian Economic Summit Group has projected that inflation will drop to 24.7% in 2025. The group also forecasts that the foreign exchange rate will stabilize at an average of 1,300 naira per US dollar, driven by anticipated improvements in fiscal and monetary policy alignment. This is contained in the NESG's 2025 Macroeconomic Outlook Report released on Thursday, January 23, 2025, under the theme Stabilization in Transition, Rethinking Reform Strategies for 2025 and Beyond. The report credits the anticipated reduction in inflation to better coordination between fiscal and monetary policies. By aligning government spending with targeted monetary interventions, policymakers aim to curb the inflationary pressures that have plagued the Nigerian economy in recent years. Dr. Shakirudeen Taiwo is an economist with the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. He joins me live in the studio to continue this conversation. Thank you so much. It's good to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me on your show and to discuss this newly launched macroeconomic outlook for 2025. Indeed.
Let's begin our conversation with the performance of Nigeria, at least for the year 2024. There was a lot of ups and downs, you would agree with me. Some macroeconomic trends and sectoral developments that you noticed in the year. Can you take us through that to start this conversation?
So at the NESG, in reviewing the performance of the economy in 2024, so what we did was to actually develop two critical macroeconomic tools. So the first is the macroeconomic heat map, which actually helps us to map the short-term effect of policy reforms policies that have been introduced in the mid of 2023.
Okay.
We're able to track these policy changes across key fundamental macroeconomic variables. So this shows us a picture of a quarter-on-quarter performance of indicators that are of interest, like the GDP. However, what we felt or were able to get was that only the external indicators, such as the external reserve that closed the year at $40.9 billion, and our external trade balance, that actually also in the first three quarters, there was around 15.1 trillion naira, were relatively in the favorable condition. All other indicators performed poorly when we compare on a short-term basis. Then we also developed the macroeconomic condition index that gives us more broader or omniscient overview of the Nigerian economy since 1999. So what we observed was that the economy, though the macroeconomic condition deteriorated in the year 2024, but the pace of the deterioration slowed down because the movement of the index was from 2.2 index points in 2023 to 2.5 index point in 2024. What we also did in the report was then to capture the overview of the economy under four themes. The first is the rising condition and weak productivity, which we notice across board. The cost of production and cost of living actually increased in 2024 from the MPR increasing from 18.75 to around 27.5%. That's a huge cost of credit to business. And we also have that in the year, our growth was majorly squeezed to few sectors. So in the first three quarters of 2024, what we had was that only 4 sectors grew above 5 points. Other sectoral growth were below 5 points. And from NESG classification of the 20 broad economic activities in the country, we realized that only 4 sectors are growth drivers. That is, sectors that have performed to get us to 3.2% that we did in the year. So we realized, and these sectors are the ICT, the financial and services, and oil and gas, pulling us off. And so, we'll still see that oil and gas is still a major driver of our growth. And we have water and services. Other sectors, 14 sectors, we call them growth stagnators. Economic activities, 14 of them, they are growth stagnators. While we have 2 growth draggers, economic activities that keep dragging the growth of the economy. So what we are saying is that out of our 20 broad sectoral classification, only 4 were driving our growth. And the 3.2% of the growth that we had in this year, we credited to them. We also realized that though in the year, there's a sort of policy clarity in terms of what the fiscal policy is doing. Subsidy regime has ended. First subsidy regime has ended, and it has ended. We didn't see policy reversals as we have noted in recent times. We saw with the monetary policy, there's clarity. We are targeting inflation, so which means interest rate hike will be what we'll see, and we noticed it, what I've noted. And also, there is this call around, we are stabilizing exchange rates, not really bringing it down. Is that we are stabilizing it at a level, and we actually saw that there's some sort of stability. And from our report, you could see the gaps, the premium between the parallel market and the official market actually fizzled out. So this actually led to stability in the market, and this is credit to a lot of reforms that were introduced by the central bank. We also had issue with policy synchronization between the monetary and the fiscal policy, which had actually resulted in a lot of huge fiscal pressure for the fiscal side. And our observation is that the increase in interest rates, the MPR is more like an anchor rate for the economy. The treasury bills followed through, closing the year at 18%. So for government, that's huge cost of credit to even the government. And the exchange rate depreciation that was in the year around 41.4%, this made Nigeria to pay more in terms of external debt service to around 107.7% in the year. We saw that there had to be more synchronization. That gap had to be closed. But what we said was that the synchronization gap in the year is closing up and was less intense than what we have in 2023. And the last, just like I've said, is our external sector that actually performed relatively okay. Our external trade in the first 3 quarters had a trade surplus of 15.1 trillion naira. And we have the external reserve closing the year at some record high of 14.9%. So that's huge for us. So that is the way we actually looked at the economy in 2024. In some aspect of the economy, it is for us to clap for the government. In some aspect, we are saying we need to do more in this regard.
Let's now look at this outlook report as presented by the NESG. And the theme, stabilization in transition. Rethinking reform strategies for 2025 and beyond. Tell us more about this. The government has said these reforms will follow you through, no pushbacks. You also alerted that in your first submission. So what really, tell us your understanding and the trust of this report? So
the report, we actually, in 2024, what we did when this government actually started the administration with a lot of reforms rollout. So the NESG actually termed the government a willing reformer. During our NESG 29, where we had the president opening the section, and we had the presentation, we also have the dream with him. So it is like this administration is a willing reformer. However, reforms actions have trade-offs and unintended consequences. What we then realized was that these unintended consequences is pushing Nigerians and businesses to the brim of either collapse. We were very close to having a living condition crisis in this country. So as a result of that, we are saying these reforms are good. However, there's a need for us to rethink some of this process. And what are those lessons? In the report, we actually identify some key lessons: the timeliness of reforms and the timeliness of interventions. So we said, firstly, the monetary policy had to double down on the fiscal intervention roles that we have been doing, which we noted during the last administration. The CBN was doing more fiscal functions, having huge intervention programs running. But why the CBN had to stop this, and we are introducing reforms that escalate cost of living, then we are seeing there's a need for us to rethink, to balance, to have a goal that is coherent. And sure, we also made some key lessons around there has to be public trust, there has to be timeliness of critical policy. We have to understand that reforms and growth have to go line in line. And that's why we also push forward that instead of following the global philosophy around stabilization, where you would be forced either to choose between growth agenda or you choose between price agenda. When I mean growth agenda, the government will concentrate on increasing productivity irrespective of the inflation consequences. While the other philosophy is for the government to consider reducing inflation irrespective of what will be the consequence on the productivity of sector. We are saying there's a need for us to balance. We need to stop the binary issue, either of growth or prices. You have to balance it up. So that's why we are saying for this time there has to be more coordination as we introduce measures that will control inflation in terms of hiking interest rates, which we are not sure. We are saying there has to also be intervention that tends to cushion the unintended effect of some of these policies from the monetary side. We are seeing cost of input due to depreciation of FX. We are fine with the stability in our naira, but we are seeing the value also has huge consequence for businesses that rely on imported inputs to drive the economy. So we are saying all this that would need to then have more like in consolidation. And that's why in our policy intervention suggestion, not policy recommendation, we're saying there's a need for us to have a concurrent programs that are targeted at the poor household and small businesses running alongside some of these reforms. So it is from these our lessons that I've identified from the reforms that have been introduced in mid-2023 and some of the best practices in terms of achieving stabilization in short term, we then develop this. And if you could see in our framework that we have developed, we then have an adjusted framework that tends to account for what is the optimal pathway that the government needs to consider to push us out of this phase as quick as possible. And there's a philosophy that we must understand in the economics of stabilization. The poor and small businesses are mostly affected at this stage of any economic phase or reforms.
True.
So as a result of that, the government, while continuing these reforms, must always have at the back of its mind to set up a robust physical and social interventions that would support households that are vulnerable and support businesses that are weak in ensuring that businesses continue producing and they keep recruiting. And in our business confidence report, which is also on the side, we saw a lot of firms start reducing employment. These are social consequences. So these are more like the key message of this report. Government, please continue these reforms, but there is another aspect we need not close our eyes.
It's really getting interesting. Let's look at monetary policies because, you know, and a lot is being discussed here now. And for 2024, do you think that this stability that we see in the exchange rate can be sustained? And moving forward in 2025, what do you think can be done?
So the question around stability of the exchange rate, it's for us to actually interrogate what led to this stability. This stability as a result of those key measures that the central bank actually instituted to ensure that there is transparency, there is clarity in the foreign exchange market. And so as a result, we saw an increase in liquidity into the market because the sellers are sure they have willing buyers. So it's more like starting a willing buyers and willing seller, and we have seen the profit. However, just like the government of the central bank assured the people that we won't stop at stabilizing as well. We'll look at measures that would ensure that we earn more, get more liquidity to the market so that Naira can appreciate.
Yes.
We can have a lower exchange rate. So for me, if the CBN continues with this coherent policy that is consistent, continue its messaging, I think the stability in the year can be achieved. And it's on this premise that the NESG actually projected, we following the ideal pathway, we might close the year at 1,300. If you know this,
that'll be good.
This is 100 Naira lower than what even the federal government projected in the 2025
yes.
budget.
Yes, it's really interesting. Let's now talk about the people as we wrap up this conversation. Now, what sort of interventions are you looking at or are you suggesting in this your report can help, you know, address some of these challenges, you know, that people feel the fallout of these reforms? So
in our previous report, as we have done in this report, it's that we have identified that not all problems need us to throw money at. Some problems had to do with we removing or unlocking the regulatory constraint that we have around productivity in this country. So what we are saying to the government is to look at those low-hanging fruits with respect to addressing regulatory constraint. Can we decongest our ports? It is still always clear. World Bank report in the early 2020, in early this current decade, that said it is costlier moving your container from Tinka to Kanu than it is from China to the port. So are we removing this constraint? Because these are additional costs for businesses. Or we have noticed an improvement in electricity these days. Can we also scale that level, that the cost of electricity, cost of operation to businesses are predictable at that level? And I know government is doing a lot on that. You could see a lot in that, because there is no country that grows or develop or industrialize with energy problem. It's not done. And that's why we could see in the whole of 2024, the South African economy was bleeding from load shedding. So energy is key. The government should look at energy. And we know if government should do this, then there should then be a structured and targeted intervention. So intervention in two ways. Some, it is access to credit for businesses. Some is targeted infrastructural development. When the logistic is less costly, then businesses grows. We need not also mention this, that they also need to be enterprise more led productivity. And I could give you an example. We could see the reduction in price of some basic household goods at the moment, like tomato that has been celebrated, because the government had the concerted effort that farmers must start dry season farming. So structural interventions that are addressed at productivity must be pursued, and must be pursued to a logical condition. Then will then come with, can then be then soft loans to businesses. And this also has to be to real businesses. To real businesses. So as this fund gets to these businesses, they are translating into productivity, and they are translating into job creation for the people. These are a lot of our recommendations. But as a private sector led think tank, our message is always very clear. Ensure that these growth binding constraints are removed for businesses. Regulatory, let there be clarity in terms of tax businesses pay. Let it be infrastructure facilities, among others. We think if we're able to do this, Nigerian then can then push up to the 5.5% that we projected. However, we are saying for us it is a scenario like, because of our framework we have given. If this constraint are still existing, we might be doing less than we have projected, the 3.4. Then if the non-viable pathway we have suggested gives us 2.4, which is lower and might drag Nigerian back, we should understand that in the federal government poverty reduction and economic growth strategy document, said Nigeria needs to grow at the level of 6 points in our real GDP before it can have an impact on job creation and poverty alleviation.
It's an interesting conversation. I know we can go on and on. Dr. Shakirudeen Taiwo is an economist with the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. It's your first time on the show, and honestly, we would really like to have you again join us on this program. Interesting conversation and deep insight into this report, I must say. Thank you so much for coming through to the studio. We appreciate you. We've been speaking around the NESG macroeconomic outlook for 2025. You know, getting some very salient points on what this stands for